question is we are cost plus. So we charge hourly for our time plus a fee on all other costs. Historically, we have not charged the fee on our hourly rates. As part of our owner agreement, we have an exhibit that lists our rates and our fees for our labor. This number has typically been our burden rate plus our fee. Our client just sees the final number, and we don't add anything to that. We're wondering, what do you do? Do you charge your fee on your burden rate? Do you mark up your burden rate and charge that amount? Do you mark up your burden rate and charge your fee on top of that? Something else entirely. So I think this is an interesting conversation, especially the way that you do things, Nick. For me, I'm time and material. So mine is a loaded labor rate. So I'm clearly defining all of our labor rates at contract, and that's a loaded rate. So it includes all of our labor burden, it includes all of our profit, all of our markup, all of our overhead. So the rate that I am defining in contract for myself for labor is that there's no fee getting applied to that. That's a fully loaded labor rate. So that has to encompass all of that. When you're cost plus, there's a couple of different ways to do that from an optics perspective to make sure that you're getting the margins that you need and that your markup actually makes sense. So I know that, Nick, you're using a market rate, which I think is interesting that some people don't fully understand.
Yeah. So we charge, we essentially charge a market rate for each position in our company. And what we determined was a market rate. And I think carpenters are a good example of, or a good use, or a good example to walk through. So we can hire a 1099 carpenter for, say, anywhere from 75 to, or maybe 55 to $100 an hour. And, obviously based on experience and skill set. But let's just use $75 an hour as an example. We pay them as a 1099, like, hey, we need you to do carpentry for a couple of weeks. We pay them $75 an hour. That's their rate. And since they're a sub, we take that and then we mark that up and we add our fee to it and we bill that to the client. We do the same thing for our in-house carpenters, meaning that we will charge the same hourly rate as what it would cost us to hire a 1099 trade, rather than just the burden rate. Now, I want to be careful in saying this because contractually, if you're cost plus, the whole point is to charge your cost plus a fee, and your cost would be your burdened rate for that labor, which, I've shared before, but like I was essentially taken by a client and I wrote them a 6-figure check back because we didn't have this defined in our contract. But in our contract now, we define the rate for each role in the company. So again, using the $75 as an example, like all carpenters build out $75 per hour. Now, I had one client that said, that straight up asked, like, are you marking up your carpenter's hourly rate, then charging me a fee on top of that? And I said, yes. And they said, well, you're double dipping. And I said, sure. And they're like, well, I just don't feel like, I don't feel like that's fair that you would charge, make a profit on the labor and then a fee on top of that. I said, well, what I could do is I could just sub all the carpentry out and you'll pay the exact same amount of money, but at least I'm not making more money.
Yeah.
And the client was like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, I would prefer your guys to do the work. I said, right, like we're charging a market rate for these guys. The additional profit I make by having my carpenters do the work is the investment. Like, that's the reward I get as a business for taking the risk of having additional employees, for training them, for everything that I'm doing within the company to retain them, to hire them. That is the benefit of being in business, is you make a profit. So ultimately, like, that, the client was like, no, it totally makes sense. That's fair. Now,
yeah, so essentially what they're wanting you to do is say, okay, this is the cost of my employee. That's going to be in our schedule of values, or when you're billing, here's the cost of our employee, and then whatever your builder's fee is, which is your overhead and your profit, They just want that applied to
Right.
that cost. But what you're doing is you're taking your burden and your markup from the rate that you're getting from a subcontracted carpenter, and then applying that builder's fee on top of it. So that's the issue, quote, issue that they're having there. But as long as that's explicitly defined as the market rate in your contract, and that builder's fee, which is again your overhead and profit, is getting applied to that, that's a non-issue.
Exactly. Yeah.
And what that, like, that's the same thing for me with the loaded labor rate. I have different rates for different people who are working for me, and what that helps me do is not have to determine exactly who's doing what trade when I go to budget for that project. So I give myself a little bit of wiggle room to make sure that I can, and that's just the way that I do things, where it's like, hey, here's the range of who I can hire to do this project to meet your budget, meet your needs, execute at the quality that we need to, and I can plug and play that labor rate in there to make it all work out on the back end.
Let me explain. One follow-up question that comes up is, are you charging all your carpenters the same rate, even if you pay them different? And for us, yes. So, and the thought process behind that, say, we have two carpenters. One, is making, say $5 more per hour. They're still both of them are being billed out at the same rate. And my mindset behind that is, the guy that's making $5 per hour is making less mistakes.
Yeah.
So the guy that's making $5 an hour less is probably making more mistakes, or is just less efficient. So I am paying, even though I'm making a larger margin on that employee that makes less, that margin gets eaten up by rework or additional training or just the cost of inefficiency. So that margin shrinks as they get better, but that's because they're like, that margin is 100% ours, rather than going into the reinvestment of that particular individual. Now, there's also the argument where it's like, okay, well, why charge market rate? Why not charge more than market rate? You should. Like, if your guys are better than what is market, or you are selling a product that is better than what is quote unquote market, then yeah, there should be a premium to that. But the point is like, you are billing this, you are taking the risk by having employees. You're doing all of that brain damage of making sure that you're, legitimate in terms of having these W-2 employees and all of the things that go along with that. You need to be rewarded for that, and that's what that additional markup really is. But it's really critical to have it specifically called out in your contract.
Yeah, that's where you'll get yourself into trouble. And for me, it's similar, right? Where if I were just doing carpentry, it would be simpler to have a single rate for carpentry, but we could start the day doing layout and then go to framing and then be doing drywall and then painting later. So then, rather having that broken into all of these different sub trades, I just have different labor rates that encompass all of that. And it comes down to the same thing: experience, productivity, level of execution. So I have a couple of different labor rates that I can make almost any job work based on whatever the job's calling for at that point. But yeah, you'll get yourself into trouble there if you're not explicitly calling out those labor rates in your contract beforehand. So that's definitely what you need to be doing there. And once a client signs off on that, I mean, that's what's going to be protecting you. It's not necessarily, does this align with the exact market rate? This is a market rate that works for us based on our projects and the work that we're doing. But once that's clearly defined in your contract, that's what's protecting you there.
I'm going to give you guys some just like high level math. By the way, if you want this calculator, we put together a labor rate calculator. It's completely free. It's either on moderncraftsman.co, or if you join the Circle community, it's in there. But say you pay a carpenter $38 an hour. You have payroll taxes, you have insurance benefits for health, dental, vision, you have a 401k match, you pay for their cell phone, they have a company vehicle, They have software licenses because they, are part of the company. They have work. You pay workers' comp on that employee. You pay general liability on that employee. Then you also have company holidays. Maybe 10 holidays a year. You also have PTO. And on all of the things I just rattled off, so between $38 an hour plus all of that, that ends up costing me $61 an hour. Like that's that is my actual cost. So say I bill that person out at $75 an hour, I'm really making $14 an hour, not the almost 40 that you would think based on just the hourly rate itself. But if you want that calculator, it's on our website, moderncraftsman.co, and it's also in the Circle community. And you can do this math and figure out like really what your labor costs are.